Judge and opponent ready.
Ready.
Go. So first you're going to pull across Tremaine's story. This is the window through which we're going to be able to view why it's so important to connect with one case. It's because in reading Tremaine's story, we understand his emotions. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the neg. But then you're going to pull across on observation 1, the Taylor and Jarvis 1. So it doesn't matter whether this talks about policy or Lincoln Douglas. Go into virtually any Lincoln Douglas round, including this one, in which my opponent actually violates the entire affirmative framework. That's going to be even a reason to vote him down, because even in this particular round, we see that Lincoln Douglas is, and actually, that even Lincoln Douglas debate is further advancing this sort of excessive use of speed and technical jargon. And so it doesn't matter whether it's policy or Lincoln Douglas, we still see the same thing happening. That's why we still need to take action, regardless of what type of debate it is. That on Taylor and Jarvis too. So just because it says may, just because there's the risk of that happening, of debate in general degrading into this sort of just talking about statistics and facts, rather than really trying to empathize with one story, at the point at which we already see that happening, that means that it does imply does. It doesn't matter if it's may. Then pull across Taylor and Jarvis 3. Okay, so this technical discourse, again, we are basically like being set up in debate to become these sort of future leaders and policymakers, and at the point at which this technical discourse keeps us from even from being able to do that, that's why we have to get rid of it, and that's why we have to be able to advance and sort of become the leaders that we're supposed to become. Taylor and Jarvis 4. Okay, so at the point at which like my opponent doesn't run a narrative, he's not going to be able to establish this same sort of, he's not going to be able to access this form of knowledge, and not going to really be able to understand the gravity of the problems that we're researching. And that's a big problem, because even if he doesn't run a narrative, and even if it's just that narratives are good, they're still going to be preferred, because you're still going to want to understand what you're talking about, rather than merely spewing facts and statistics, because if we continue to do that, then we won't be able to become those leaders who understand like individuals' problems, and that's going to be bad. Then pull observation 2, which goes clean drop by my opponent. The reason why this is so important is because it's going to tell you to prefer narratives to gain this sort of insight and to give meaning to what we're doing. And I'm going to show you more on the negative case. Debate is an educational activity in which we try to learn about the situations that these individuals are in, and at the point at which we can only do that through accepting narratives and through preferring narratives, and like especially Gregory 1 and White, which tell you that only in talking about these narrative cases are we going to be able to do that. That's never going to happen. Then on observation 3, you're going to pull that across, because again, first and foremost, you're going to look to this sort of activist framework to change debate because of this excessive use of speed and jargon, and second, because of this pathos-influenced decision in which you're going to be really affirming Tremaine's story. Then you're going to go on the negative. So first on the gains theory, you can cross-apply Taylor and Jarvis 3, which tells you we seek to better know and connect to the real world. This is not like a sport, in that we're actually trying to better ourselves as human beings, which I don't believe that people who play football do. And so what we're really trying to do is establish a type of framework that allows us to do that, which is only going to be the affirmative framework. And also debate and better connecting with the stories means that like debate is broken in the first place, because we're not able to do that under like the status quo. Then on 2, so I had so like many judges have never had experience with narratives, which means that I have to, in hopes to gain access to the ballot, run this framework. On the policy paradigm, drop this, because he doesn't even uphold that. And on the number 4, I didn't cut his story on purpose, because I wanted to convey his true emotions and feelings in the real words verbatim.
Take a breath. Please.
I got it. Okay. I like you have my case pulled up on your computer.
I thought maybe I'd read it wrong. Okay.
Wait, where are we going?
We're going to go to games theory, unclean hands, the K, and back to case.
The K, like a policy paradigm?
No,
or?
I'm dropping policy. We're going to go to the critique. Don't dictate the revolution.
Okay, I got you.
Okie doke. The fatal problem with Nirel's position is that she wants to have her cake and eat it too. You can't both decry the traditional debate paradigm and then still use it to try to win the debate round. The point Nirel argues, at the point Nirel argues her framework on the AC, we are in a traditional debate, and her narrative advocacy is disingenuous. She does the same when she counters my off case. There's 3 reasons I'm winning this round: games theory, unclean hands, and the K. Let's start on games theory. Nirel never warrants why the proper thing to do is to look to debate as an educational tool, especially when it so closely resembles other competitive activities like wrestling or tennis. Pull across the interpretation that debate is a game and the violation that Nirel uses narrative theory to try and turn it into a classroom instead. In the standard, pull across the snowball card, which she never counters, that tells you that debate is structured as a competitive sport where the object is to win, not educate, and the high school competition subpoint that tells you that winning a debate is about skill, specifically skill in the evaluation of the significance of evidence, meaning representative examples of the resolution as a whole rather than just a single narrative is what's needed, as well as the breadth of argumentation, which re-enables speed as a legitimate strategy. Recall that in Standard 3, we do not change for its own sake. Nirel first has to prove that debate is broken before we fix it. Go to the voters. There's 2 ways to negate off this theory. The first way is straight up. Debate is a game and not an educational vehicle, and Nirel's entire justification is that narratives better prepare future policymakers. Independently, the second way to vote here is off Nirel's unproven assumption that there is a causal relationship between traditional logos-heavy debate and the terribleness that is technocratic policymakers. And that link goes completely unproven in the round. Thus, you negate to confirm games theory or to avoid the change for change's sake. Go to unclean hands. Remember, the basic principle here is that debaters should be held to their own standards. Nirel violates this when she runs 3 full minutes of framework in the AC instead of sitting down after the narrative is over, however long it takes to read. Extend the standards of clean hands that Nirel is not entitled to a remedy for a problem that she says that debate is if she willingly participates in exacerbating the problem. And pull across the standard of reciprocity. This is a critical argument in the round. You vote here to tell Nirel that she does not get unfair access to the ballot that I do not get when we're both arguing within the traditional debate structure and using traditional framework and theory arguments. She wants it both ways. Use your ballot to hold her AC to her own standard before she's allowed to hold LD to her standard. Go to the K. The thesis of the K is that Nirel is coercively co-opting Tremaine's story by reading the narrative, because while she can read his words, she's too privileged to convey his pain. The suffering you're seeing is Nirel's, not Tremaine's, and this serves to further disenfranchise Tremaine. Go to the links. Hold Nirel to her own Gregory 2 card, which tells you the narrative facilitates an audience to hear a marginalized voice. Her only argument against this is that she says she did not edit or cut Tremaine's story, but if you look to the first 3 words in her affirmative case, call for it after the round, you'll see this is utter bullshit. Her first 3 words are, "my father would," and it's in brackets. In other words, she's paraphrasing. Whatever the reason for that, it is not a word-for-word verbatim, as she claimed, and her case was staked on that. There are no other affirmative arguments against the K, so we're going to go to the impacts. Extend the make card that tells you that those who speak for the oppressed, that they are in actuality dehumanizing them, and that the better thing to do is engage ourselves in the plight of the oppressed and resist domestic violence ourselves. Go to the alternative. The clear avenue for speaking against oppression is not to speak for others, but to speak for ourselves. Now this, as she points out in cross-examination, she hasn't had or implies at least, she hasn't had very specific interaction with this particular topic, or had domestic violence happen to her. But this doesn't mean we need to have suffered domestic violence personally. The narrative only works when we speak of our own emotional reactions to the topic. Most of us have, in one way or another, been profoundly touched by domestic violence through someone we know or perhaps come in contact with, and many times that experience has touched us deeply. I know it did in my case. It's that experience of fear, betrayal, anger, pain, despair, and loss that needs to be communicated, because that personal experience is honestly persuasive in a way that telling someone else's story never truly is. Even if you like the narrative framework, you negate off the K to insist that the story that is told belongs to the speaker. Go to case. On case. On Taylor and Jarvis 1, she tells you, gives you explanation to tell you that Lincoln Douglas is essentially like policy, but she mishandles my attack here. Taylor and Jarvis tell you, if you read the cards, and particularly the fine print that she didn't read, is that policy debaters become policy makers. There is no advocacy here, regardless of how similar LD rounds are to policy rounds now, that Lincoln Douglas debaters grow up to become policy makers. My advocacy is they grow up to become other things like doctors and lawyers. While I may not be able to prove that, she can't prove they become policymakers, and it's her framework. The burden of proof lies on her in this card, and this is what she's the basis on which she's justifying the paradigm shift. Make her prove that to you, and from Taylor and Jarvis. She goes to Taylor and Jarvis too, and she says, well, any risk is unacceptable, and that's just going to turn the word may into the word does. That is not what Taylor and Jarvis are telling you. Taylor and Jarvis tell you that this may be the case, but she doesn't specify the specifications or the number of times or how prevalent the problem actually is. She just reiterates and then translates the word may into does. Don't let her get away with that. That's sloppy. Go all the way down to observation 3. Skip observation 3. So where do we finish up at the end? When we get to the end of this round, we're faced with an affirmative advocacy to fix debate and vote affirmative as micropolitical action to enable narratives. But closer examination is going to show you that, one, with games theory, the debate is not broken and it's not in need of fixing. With unclean hands, that Nirel can't claim a ballot for her fixed debate advocacy when she spends the vast majority of her time perpetuating the very problem that she decries. And with the K, that speaking for ourselves is truly the only persuasive narration advocacy.
Okay. So...
You got 55.
Okay, can you just time me,
Yeah.
please? Okay.